What's going on, Dom?
Jesse, Ruben, so good to see you fellas again, man. It's been like 7, 8 months, maybe a pandemic mixed in there somewhere.
Yeah, it's been
Oh
a
yeah,
while.
nothing, no big deal this year. You know what I mean? 2020's been great.
Sure, it's just been it's like every other standard year.
Right.
Yeah.
Uh, Dom, I just really want to jump into this because recently I've been listening to your podcast, The Great Man Within. For those folks who don't know, Dom has this wonderful podcast shared on my Instagram recently. And I follow on Instagram, and something that came up to me recently, which I was the one that told Jesse. I was like, Jesse, we need to have Dom back on. So first of all, big ups for being the first person who's been here the second time. So this is second Dom's second time around. So appreciate you being here as usual. But something that I wanted to talk about and start with is recently you did a solitude retreat in a cabin up in I, I I don't know if I'm getting it
Idaho.
right. Idaho. There we go. I was like, was it Wisconsin? It was somewhere. And I was just like, oh man, I'm dying to do something like that. So funny enough, you inspired me and I went on my own little cabin trip, not too far from where I live, but up in the mountains in a cabin near a lake for 2 days. I didn't get to
Oh
do a
yeah.
week like you did, but I wanted to start there because I thought it was like some most people are home right now in quarantine. So to
Right.
them, that's a specific kind of solitude. But when you live in a city like New York or where I'm at in California, tons of people around, I know I've been looking for an escape. But I wanted to hear from you as to what inspires you to do that for up to the week that you did it, and what were some things that you worked on while you were there? Because I know you're big into the self development and self work and doing the inner work. So I just want to hear from you about that solitude trip and like what went on during that time.
Yeah, I really appreciate that question, man. And it's an honor to be the first two-time guest on the show. I don't take that lightly. So I will also aspire to be the first three-time guest on the show. I'm just saying for future reference. Okay. Um, the solitude trips. This is something that I started. So 4 years ago, I left a 15-year corporate career. I was working for a financial services company called Prudential Financial, big global 100, Fortune 100 firm. And I took a 90-day radical sabbatical, traveled around the world before starting my next business. I went to Hawaii, Thailand, Bali, New Zealand, Australia, lived like a kid. I bought one-way tickets. I had nothing planned. I followed my energy, went and did all the things that I wanted to do when I wanted to do them. And I'd always had this desire to take my meditation game to the next level.
Mhm.
So in 2016, I had this idea of, doing a 10-day silent meditation on the big island of Hawaii. So Vipassana. So for 10 days, you don't talk, you don't work out, you don't read, you don't write, you don't exercise. I mean, it's 10 days of going inward. And that experience really changed me because I was a super anxious dude, constantly in do mode, goal setting, goal crushing. Like that was just how I lived my life. Got a lot done, but was also really wound up on the inside. And this 10 days of just like sitting still, you're meditating 15, 16, 17 hours a day. It changed me at a depth that has persisted since then. Like I have not been the same man since then. And what that taught me was like this beauty of being able to go inward, like really deep inward, and to discover these parts of me I hadn't looked closely at, where I could find answers about like what lit me up in life. What's the legacy I want to leave behind? Um, you know, any stories I have around money or not enoughness or relationships, all that. And so coming out of that, I made this commitment to make solitude a part of my life, at least like in an annual pilgrimage of some kind. Last year, I rented a house in Colorado for 1 week, no Wi-Fi, no cell service. I brought some of my favorite books up there, and I envisioned the next 10 years of my life, which is where I came up with this idea of like helping 10 million men get on the path of doing inner work over the next 10 years to discover their greatest potential, right? And that put into practice like a lot of the work I did over this last year in building my business, elevating the podcast, starting a mastermind. And so this year, going to Idaho in the middle of nowhere was about another 7 days of creating, okay, what's the next year's worth of work? How do I build on all the momentum So like what that 7 days looks like, Ruben, I know you asked the question. It's, I do a lot of meditation. I bring a lot of my favorite books up there. I do bring some additional mushrooms on the trip too, because that's something that I work with. I haven't talked about that on the podcast yet because I want to be really responsible about how I do it. But it's like a deep spiritual journey for me. I spend 2 days like doing those. And I do a ton of hiking. I always go to outdoor places where I can connect with nature. So that's kind of how I do, and I'll pause here in a second. Two more points on this. John Wineland, who's a man that I follow, he's a disciple of David Dada. He's a great teacher of masculine leadership. I had him on the Great Man Within podcast. He says that the number one thing that he encourages any man to do if he's wanting to find purpose in his life is to cultivate a solitude practice. Whether that's like 5 minutes a day, just staring out, 30 minutes a day if you can, or going on like these extended trips, like 2 days for you, Ruben, 7 days it was for me. That's like super important if a guy wants to find his purpose. And Bill Gates was famous for doing Think Week, right? And like he would rent a place, I don't know, it was like in the Midwest somewhere on a lake where he would read like 15 to 18 books in a week. And some of his biggest ideas and inventions for the future of Microsoft would happen. And he would do these Think Weeks twice a year for most of his time at the helm of CEO. So it's, practice that some pretty impressive people do. And I figured, who the hell am I to buck that trend?
It's a fascinating point that you bring up, and the fact that the connection between purpose and solitude, because something that I've found within myself I found this pattern in my life, sort of chaotic pattern within my own life, where a lot of times I've made decisions on what's next, not from a place of solitude. More often than not, I've done it from a place of chaos.
Sure.
And this feeling of wanting to get away from my current situation, or feeling bored, or feeling, like you said, anxious. And it's interesting how I'd be curious to know why you think or have found that within solitude stems purpose or stems newness versus out of chaos, because you typically hear this idea that like from chaos comes order, right?
Sure.
From and you hear it within the hero's journey as well, right? Where this call to action, and it's typically something external that's occurring that we're moving towards. But here you're deliberately saying, I'm going to stop. And from stopness, you're developing something new. So I think that's a keen distinction, and I'd love to know, your thoughts on that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I've had some great things in my life happen from a place of chaos, from a place of whatever, like the house is burning, I got to make a decision. So there's plenty of that. I wouldn't want to build my life around making decisions from that place. I prefer to do it from a more stable foundation. I think the thing, Jesse, that is so powerful for me when I tap into stillness is I have this deep sense of listening, like this acute, penetrating sense of listening of what's going on at the deepest part of my being, and there's like the only way I can hear that is where I clear out the clutter. For example, there's so many great voices that I listen to on podcasts and books and coaches and gurus and, like everyone telling me what to do and how to hack and do this. And I love taking all that information in, but after a point in time, I don't even know where my voice starts and stops and where everyone else's begins. It becomes like this muddled mess of confusion in my mind. And so to get back to center, to actually like understand, am I making a decision from my head or from my heart or from my gut or from my soul? Like those are very, very quiet distinctions that can only happen in a place where there's some stillness. And so I've really had for me some people are really good at this. Like they can just kind of drop their eyes closed and like do it in a moment's notice. I for whatever reason, like need that solitude, need that practice to go in so I can hear what's going on. And I think the other piece that I would add here before I'll pause is, the reason why my podcast is called The Great Man Within is because I believe that all of us, especially every man, has a great man living inside of us. Like this is the version of you that represents your best self, right? He's your best physical self, mental self, emotional, spiritual. He's the one who's patient and kind and compassionate. He's the one who's brave. He's the one who's courageous. Like you've lived him, you've experienced him in your best of moments. And oftentimes when there's the noise of the outside world, it drowns him out. So the more time I spend in stillness, the more time I can connect with him. And the more time he shows up in my life, and the more time he shows up in my life, then I'm more often him. And then, I get some of the greatest experiences of my life.
To that point, knowing that, I find that a lot of guys, like you just said, Ruben, myself, we love hierarchy to some extent, and we love having models to look after, right? So like you said, you have all these books, all these podcasts, all these people, all these men that you may look at for guidance on how you should behave in the world, potentially. And a lot of times, and at least for myself now more than ever, because there's not much else to do, you find yourself going deeper and deeper into these rabbit holes to the point where you can sort of start losing yourself. You sort of start seeing, well, is any of this because I actually want it, or is it because of what my imagination deems this guy to be or this person to be? So, and I'd love to know what you think is the ratio between like going and reading and studying and understanding masculine psychology and understanding different men's perspectives on things versus putting all of it away, deleting the Instagram, putting the books away, putting the podcast away, and spending time understanding your perspective.
Totally. Yeah, it's I think the ratio is always going to be a moving target depending on where you are in your journey. For example, like in initiation rituals where, like back in history where there was actually like wise elders who were overseeing boys, into that rites of passage as man, for a period of time, like those boys were being told what to do by their parents, by their wise elders, like it was like they didn't have much autonomy. And then one of the, many initiation rituals involve a boy going off into his own, surviving in the wilderness, like making his own decisions. So like a complete disconnection for a temporary period of time to see what he's made of. So then he comes back a man. And then, there are other periods of the experiences like that over time where there's like a disconnection from all other voices to go out and go through some ordeal or some trial where like you have to rely completely on yourself to like, your own inner compass. So I don't know what the ratio is, Jesse. Like there are times that, actually during this pandemic for me, I went deep into my own inner world. I disconnected from a lot. I've never listened to fewer podcasts. I've never read fewer newsletters or fewer books than over these last like 6 months. I'd say never in the context of these last 10 years. It was just like, I kind of went deep off and I did a ton of inner journeys, meditations, additional mushroom journeys, so that I could go into my inner world and go to that next level. If you think about men, even like from a sexual perspective, those of us who have dicks, like we penetrate, right? Like penetration is what we do sexually speaking. Penetration is also what we do in this world. Like when we penetrate something and go deep into the essence of what that thing is, whether it's like in music or poetry or business or whatever it is that you are like excellent at, you penetrate that thing to its core, then you're irresistible to the world, right? When you do the same for yourself and understand like how you can go deep inside of yourself, you are the most fascinating fucking person on the planet. Most guys, though, haven't penetrated themselves enough, deeply enough, so they go to everyone else who's interesting. And it's much quicker to go to listen to Tony Robbins or Gary Vaynerchuk because they're ubiquitous and they're entertaining and they're brilliant. And I do that sometimes too. But I would say one of the ways that you know that you're going too far down that rabbit hole is when you stop creating, when you stop penetrating, right? Like if you're no longer doing podcasts, if you're no longer writing and putting your perspective out in the world, when you're no longer sharing, when you're no longer penetrating and you're just consuming, that's when I think that the scale has tipped, and it's a great opportunity to take like a temporary break and to reconnect with yourself.
Oh man, Dom, like you gave me goosebumps by saying that. um, seriously, because funny enough, like over this summer, because of all this, like I went through that where I noticed that, and Jesse knows because we have conversations outside of the podcast, that I just went on this consumer like roller coaster, like to the point I remember I forgot what book I was reading. Jesse was like, "Why are you reading that book? Like, what is it bringing you right now, based on like what you're going through?" So my anxiety level started going up, and I'm just like,
Yeah.
"What is going on with me? Like, why?" And I noticed I was just consuming, to the point that I had to limit it. And I was just like, I'm not going to read every day. I'm not going to listen to 3 podcasts in one day. I'm going to kind of take a step back. I'm going to take a step back from Instagram. I'm going to journal more. I'm going to start meditating in the morning. I'm going to take these long walks that I usually do every single day and just like think. Just take a philosopher walk is what I started calling it, because it's just my time to
Nice.
think, put things together, and do all these things. Because as men, I just, and this can lead to like the next conversation, kind of like how I wanted to definitely talk about masculinity and these things, because I think there's a lot of misunderstanding out there, one. And I try to bring certain conversations to certain people, and they're just like, they bring, they smack me with the feminist things, and like men have had it all forever, and there's patriarchy and all these things. And I'm just like, right, granted, that has existed, but like there's more to it. Our men are like losing something. I can see it in my day job. I work with a lot of young folks, and I see the young men, and the women kill it. The women kill it. But the boys, they have a hard time. They have a really hard time. They need a lot of guidance. They need a lot of coaching. And I'm just like, they require much more work. And statistically in my job, they're the ones that drop out of our program much faster than women do. The number is staggering, actually.
Why do you
And
think that is,
then
Ruben? I'm just curious. Why do you think that is?
currently, I think it's just one, to be honest, like a lot of their backgrounds, right? We work with diverse set of students, a lot of Blacks, Latinos like myself, Black and brown students, and a lot of their outside noise is what really affects them in their job, right? Or they cannot handle they don't have the mental fortitude to handle the amount of work that we provide them. Or when they go off to internships, they're not able to keep their word, or they miss a lot of things. They don't keep their promises. I'm talking about like we put them in jobs on Facebook and all these companies out there, right? So they have to do some big stuff, and they suffer with imposter syndrome to the point that they're like, I don't want to do this, and they drop out. And we have coaches, we coach them, we have professionals, we even have therapists on staff, but for some reason, the men struggle the most. And I take it from, like, I look at it from what I experienced, and growing up fatherless, and you see that a lot, and with all the diverse stuff happening, like, it's just, I know you do a lot of masculinity work, and that's why I love listening to your podcast. One, I love seeing your Instagram posts, because you are there for the men. And you just mentioned that your goal of helping, was it 10 million?
10 million men, yeah.
10 million men, like, that's amazing, and it's inspiring, and it's something that I want to do. And Jesse and I have talked about that, like helping us young men. So like, I want to hear from you, like, when it comes to supporting the men, like, where do we begin? Like, what do you think where's that root, like the root that we can just like kind of focus on and help them throughout this journey? I know you mentioned initiation, which I think is one, but is there anything else there?
Yeah, dude, it's a big question, and the 10 million men doesn't happen with just me. Like
Right.
it's not going to be Dominick leading 10 million men. Actually, a big part of it is going to be coming together with men like you who are leading your groups of men, and coming together with other leaders of men like Larry Hagner, who runs the Good Dad Project, you know, guys who want to be better dads. And, you know, like there's going to be lots of groups that are going to be serving their own communities, but we need to come together to make men's work much more accessible, right, to people of all ages, all races, all socioeconomic demographics. We need to make it more attractive, you know, because men's work still is stigmatized. Like
Right.
I spent 15 years, like I said, in financial services, and, you know, those guys think about like, oh, men's work. Like, are those guys, you know, like, are you going to a men's retreat and wearing flannels and growing out beards and, you know, crying on each other's shoulders and doing elephant walks in the woods? And I'm like, a lot of that stuff. Yeah. You know, but not always, you know, it's like these
Right.
guys. So we need to make it like attractive for all people, like for men, no matter where they are. And Ruben, like you know, to your question about like, where do we begin? I actually think there's a lot of different answers to that, because men find inner work in a variety of different ways. I found it through bottoming out, going to Sex Addicts Anonymous, right? Like, so that was my like 12-step program. Someone else, maybe it's an alcohol program. Someone else, it could be about, you know, financial well-being. Someone else could be about mental health. Maybe someone else wanted meditation or mindfulness. What we need to do is create like enough entry points for men, like when they finally wake up and want to get on that path, that there's one that's available to them, that speaks to them. That's why I think that like your two voices are super important, because you're going to hit a different demographic than I'm going to hit. And someone else who's, you know, doing this in Santiago, Chile, like is going to have a different demographic than someone in Sydney, Australia. But I will say that like one non-negotiable that's missing from most men's lives is having access to older mentors, right? Older men who are doing it like better than they are. Like, so, you know, like you guys are younger than I am. It's awesome. And it's like an honor to be asked to be on your show, to like listen and talk to you guys years older than me that I could look up to. Because for most of my life, I didn't have that. And one of the things that always existed in like healthy, masculine, feminine societies was wise elders, you know, who would teach the men and the young boys. And there would be a system of initiation. There'd be values that be passed down. There'd be lessons that were learned. And now, in the absence of that, we see things like fraternity hazing, gangs. I mean, these are all examples of men and boys who have no access to older wise men.
So with that, how do you combat the fact that you don't have many elder in your experience? Because for me, that's something I struggle with a lot. I don't have many older men around me, especially physically, that I can connect with and find that relationship with. And I'm you know, much younger than both of you guys. I'm 23 years old, and so it is a time in my life where I'm turning 24. You know, the cycles in Jungian culture of every 12 years, like, and I feel it. I'm really starting to feel that there's a lot of my own identity that is being broken to a million pieces, and I don't have any direct guidance on how to piece it together. And one of the things that has entered my life in a very strange way has been religion. It's not something I was ever really interested in before. No, none of my friends were ever interested in. Not my family wasn't very religious. But something of, and I've always been sort of sacrilegious in the sense I've believed in the universe. I've believed in uh, an energy and law of attraction and these types of things, but never have I saw the potential of religion to support me in that way. And this framework of Jesus Christ and this framework of God as a masculine figure. And I'd love to know your thoughts on that, because one, I think, you know, we live in in a culture where religion has been bastardized in many ways.
Mm-hmm.
And also, well, I'll leave it at that.
Yeah.
Religion has been bastardized in many ways. I'd love to know your thoughts on religion and
Yeah, well,
what that could do for men.
totally. I mean, and I'll tie a few things that you asked about together. So the first part of your question was really about, like, if there aren't older men, what do you do about that? And I know religion, like if there's like a community that's religious, like you have young to old, like, and there's beautiful elements of that. So that structure is there. There's a lot of wisdom that's passed down. The first part of your question though is like, what do you do if there are no older men? Well, right now I've had to build it. So like when it doesn't exist, I've gone, like, at least in the circles that I run, because I'm not a part of a faith-based religious organization. I went out and built a mastermind. Now I'm running the mastermind. This is something that, like, I do commercially. The men pay me to do this and oversee them. But there are some men in the group who are in their mid 50s that have raised kids, you know, who are off in the world, who are adults now, who are now grandparents also. These are men that I'm coaching in certain respects, but they give me a lot of life wisdom about things that I haven't experienced yet. You know, some of them have transitioned and retired from work and now are like creating their second chapter. So, you know, they've already done all of the things in their life that proved themselves. And now they're on to this like legacy significance part of their life. So like I went out and built that. Now, anyone who's like kind of in the position that we're in right now, where there aren't a lot of these ecosystems, I would say we would have to go out and build it, attract it, go out and find the men, you know, like go seek, put it out into the universe, speak to it, you know, ask other people, who is there a wise man that wants to like mentor me? The other part of that though is hopefully once we've done the building, then the next generation won't need to build as much. Like they can just step into the community. Like that's the legacy I want to leave behind. Now, to your point about religion, I think like there are some men in my mastermind who are deeply religious, deep men of faith. And they're some of the most beautiful human beings that I know. And they're also some of the most accepting human beings that I know. There's one guy in my group, his name is Brent Walder. He was a big shot at Prudential. Like he was the chief actuary of 3 of the largest domestic businesses at Prudential. In an insurance company, an actuary, like you run the company kind of thing. So this guy was a big deal. Now, Brent knew that like I went to Sex Addicts Anonymous. He knew I ran a podcast where I talked about it. He knew about like my demons in the past. He also knew that like I grew up with a tormented relationship with religion. You know, a big part of like my path was, you know, I was an altar boy, you know, went to Catholic school for 7 years. And there was a lot of messages that I got about my sexuality that were wronged, that sent me off a path that kept my sexuality private. And I had like anger towards religion for like, you know, creating that. I blamed religion for that. He knew all of this about me. And he still hired me and brought me into Prudential to do work with his teams. He still joined the mastermind. And over the last 4 or 5 years, I've really healed my relationship with religion, because what I grew up with was just one experience. And there are so many beautiful human beings out here. And Jesse, you're one of them, right? I didn't know your path brought you to religion. I think that religion can do amazing things with respect to community, with respect to faith, with respect to acceptance. There are plenty of other, you know, there are plenty of other examples that are the opposite of what I just described. And that's what gives religion oftentimes a bad name. But the people that I know who practice with an open heart. And I think it's actually quite a beautiful place to do deep inner work with other men.
Awesome. Very cool.
I'm going to shift gears a bit. It's kind of with the masculinity, but so I listened to your podcast from yesterday or 2 days ago with Monica, her name is
Monica Yates. Yeah. Firestarter
yeah.
Monica. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that podcast. Like I'm gonna actually re-listen to it with my partner, because and I don't think that was the first person you had on our podcast who discussed like men's work as a woman. And I was curious to know, like, how do you get these women on your podcast to discuss these things? Like how do you meet women that are able to be like, hey, I understand men, I understand that this is the challenges that you face, and that there is a polarity, right, between men and women that are heterosexual, or even in gay relationships, there's always a masculine figure and a feminine figure. And a lot of people don't understand this, and a lot of relationships suffer from it. But I listen to your podcast with these women, and I'm just always astounded by the things that are saying. I'm always trying to share it with as many women, whether that's family, my partner, and all these people, because it's just like we need more women like that. Like, that's what I want to say. But it's like, how do you find that those kinds of women to get on your podcast and discuss these things? And if you want to share some of the things you talked about, that'd be great to kind of bring people to that podcast, because I think it is. I mean, I made an Instagram story for people to hear it, because I was like, you need to hear what Monica is saying. And it's amazing that we finally have women that are actually speaking out about like these things. So I just want to hear more about that and your experience there.
Sure. No, I really appreciate that. So Monica Yates is a friend, and she's a podcaster. She's a big advocate of men, right? She works with women, she coaches women, and she's a huge advocate of men, loves men. To answer your question about like, how do you find them? It's like you find one and then you meet all their friends, cause like it's the bot. Like Monica is friends with Madeline Moon, and Madeline Moon is also, an amazing woman who runs the Mind Body Musings podcast, and she coaches women, but is a huge proponent of men. I mentioned John Wineland earlier. So John Wineland is like one of my teachers around masculine leadership. He teaches like masculine leadership and polarity in the bedroom. You take one of his workshops, it's filled with women who are huge advocates of men. Some women are, like pained by men, have like, harmful histories with men and are still like working through that, but they're filled with women who love men, love the essence of men, want masculine man, who can be in control, who can lead, who can say, this is the way that we're going to do things, but also to remain open and aware of what she wants as well, to bring both and, right? So, one of the things that Monica is really outspoken about, which I think is one of the things that you're responding to, Ruben, is like she talks to women about stop emasculating men. Like stop emasculating men. She's like, I used to be the one who would, emasculate men because I was so deep in my own masculine that I wouldn't let a guy hold the door open for me, or I would eviscerate him when he tried to do that, because it was like this indictment on my ability to open a door, when all the guy's trying to do is be chivalrous. And so like, and I know why so many guys are confused right now. It's because here's a perfect example. When I was still at the Assemblage, which is where I met you guys, right? And the Assemblage was a co-working facility here in New York. I used to run these open forums to talk about sexuality. And there was this one time where there's a big group of women in the room, and we were talking about consent, right? Like consent, like, do you want a man to ask, can I touch you here before he touches you there? Or, do I ask, can I kiss you before he kisses you? So I asked the women in the room, I was like, I want to see a show of hands. How many women in the room absolutely want someone to ask for consent before he moves in for the kiss or for the touch? Half the room like put their hands up in the air, and they were super passionate about that. And I was like, how many women in the room do not want that because it's not sexy and it'll be an instant turnoff for you? The other half of the hands in the room went up. And then it sparked this huge debate, like of the women with each other, because when you ask one of them individually, sometimes they would almost speak for all women and be like, oh, and this is where it gets confusing. And so we had this like beautiful moment, and I was like, listen, each of you who raised your hands are absolutely right for you as an individual. It's when you start to speak on behalf of all women and say, a man should always ask for consent before he kisses, or he should never ask for consent and he should just go in for it. It's when you speak for all women that it confuses men. And we get screwed up in that, and we make the wrong mistake, and then we get slapped in the face or we get yelled at, and we don't know what the hell's going on. And then guys get frustrated and jaded and cynical. And then we start to look at women as the problem, which is not the case. So yeah, like there are amazing women like Madeline Moon. So these are women I would encourage you to follow on Instagram. Monica Yates, Madeline Moon. There's a woman named Ashay Sundara who teaches like orgasmic bliss to women. She's the real deal. These are women who love men and will also call us on our shit when we are not showing up. This is the other thing. Like, these women, do not mistake that. Like, they are not pushovers. Like, they know how to draw a line and call you out in a heartbeat, but they also know how to speak to you when you're showing up in your king. And that's why I love them. So I would say befriend one of them, and then find out who all their friends are, follow them, and then invite them on your podcast. They're dying to talk to men who want to hear what they have to say. They will be here any day of the week for you.
So you brought up some things, and I'm starting to see a theme here, which is there is no cookie cutter for any of this.
Hell no.
And that it brings me to two things I really wanted to chat with you today. Two of the most important things I wanted to chat with you today about, which is, I was introduced to men's work at a pretty early age. I was probably 20, 21, this was a few years ago. And then especially once I joined the assemblage, it was full on. And one of the things that I think really tripped me up at the time, because again, I only had one perspective of men's work. And that one perspective was get in touch with your feminine side. And as of most recently, I've started to have some serious qualms with that, because what I found, and this will also go into my next thing that I wanted to chat about shortly, but what I found is that that's not necessarily the best thing for a good amount of men out there. Because there are a lot of men who aren't even in touch with their masculine side.
Right. Yeah. That's right.
And we haven't even, and I think in a lot of these circles, it's not defined what, it's not even part of the discussion, really. The discussion is typically that men don't know how to feel their emotions, and assuming that that there is a specific way for men to feel emotions. And in a lot of men's circles that I've participated in, the work that's being done is like how women express their emotions, which is we sit together and we talk and we theorize and we break down a situation and we look each other in the eyes and we cry, we do things. When I think there's a time and place for that. But when that becomes the definition of men's work for some men, and that was the definition for me, at least when I started, that's what I understood men's work to be, was that we sit together and we talk about our emotions, and we talk about our life experiences. And it definitely served me in certain ways, but it didn't serve me in a lot of other ways, because I didn't understand how emotional management, I didn't understand how to move on from things. I didn't understand how to keep to my word and be disciplined. I didn't understand how to suffer through hard things. When you talk about this idea of penetration, when you're penetrating something, you're literally breaking whatever the thing is in front of you. You're going through the thing that's in front of you. So by its very nature, when you are penetrating life as a man or penetrating yourself as a man, you are breaking something down, and that includes suffering. And I don't see that really a part of the conversation. And I don't see I see the narrative being, for a man in this day and age to become better, he needs to become more feminine or more in touch with his feminine side, but not that he needs to become more masculine. And he needs to become more in touch with his masculine side. And that definition isn't very clear in a lot of circles. So I'd really love to chat about this a little bit and hear your opinion.
I think you raise a really important and fascinating point here, because I've never really thought about it this way. Is, like, has the modern age definition of men's work been more of like the feminine, been through like the entry point of the feminine? And I don't know. I haven't really broken this down in my mind yet, but what's the sequencing? Like I would believe I haven't thought deeply about this, but for me, if I'm a man who wants to be in my masculine energy, if I most resonate with my masculine energy, which I do, I would want to train there first. and then train in the feminine second. Now there are other men who more identify with their feminine energy, and maybe they want to go there first. But I think you're right, Jesse. Like, you know, this is why we hear so many women who are like, yeah, I like the fact that my guy is in touch with his emotions, but my God, like when he's sobbing all the time, he can't make a decision and can't lead me. Like, I don't want to fuck him, you know? And that's real talk. Like Ashay would tell you that, Monica Yates would tell you that, Madeline Moon would tell you that. Like they would all say that. So, you know, when you go into say like a John Wineland type of practice, like men are there to work their masculine, women are there to work their feminine. And as a man in like a John Wineland workshop, you know, you're standing and holding these like really like, you know, you're holding a structured pose with your like knees bent, your arms in the air, breathing into your belly so that you can hold structure. You can be grounded and suffer for 20 minutes, but to like penetrate that suffering so you can bring a groundedness. So like when the eye of the storm hits you in life and business and relationship, when she's coming at you like a tornado, boom, you're a rock, right? You're the mountain. It's not that you don't feel. You feel all of that pain, but you've trained to feel it and still be the rock so that she can have one of the things that Monica said in the podcast was like, when she has a meltdown, she wants you to be the rock, right? And she doesn't want you to melt down with her. You know, she wants you to be the rock and hold her. And that comes through masculine practice. One of the best analogies I ever heard about like masculine and feminine energies is, if you think about masculine energy as a riverbed, right? A riverbed is like the structure, and the feminine energy is the water that flows through it. Now, if you have a riverbed, a masculine energy without any water flowing through it, it's a really depressing thing. And if you have just water without any structure, that's how like floods, tornadoes happen. So we need both. And I think that more men need to practice what's healthy masculinity. Because Jesse, here's the other point on this. With the word toxic masculinity being thrown around so casually, and with the word patriarchy being thrown around in a way that it's conflated with masculinity, like patriarchy and masculinity have come to mean the same things. And I know this from personal experience because my podcast partner and I, Brian, he ran a sexual health company like 3 years ago that we would enter rooms with like 95, 98, 99% women only. And toxic masculinity, patriarchy were thrown around regularly and conflated with one another, where it was almost like masculinity meant something bad. And if you ever read the book King, Warrior, Magician, Lover, which is one of my favorite books, you guys have read, yeah. So Robert Moore and Doug Gillette, they talk about how patriarchy is the antithesis of healthy masculinity. Patriarchy is immature masculine energy. It's boy energy. Right? Like little tyrants running around, unhealed, uninitiated, that grow up into these like male bodies. And patriarchy is not only harmful to the feminine, it's actually harmful to the healthy masculine. Because unhealed, wounded boys who are in the patriarchy look at guys who are doing inner work like us as threats. They don't accept this. They want to snuff this out so they can maintain the power, because in their lives, everything is a hierarchy. It's either kill or be killed. And a healthy masculine man doesn't look at it that way. He sees brothers sitting in front of him. So I think like we need to go on a rebranding tour, fellas, of like what masculinity means and make sure this is disconnected from the patriarchy stuff.
Yeah, you know, I want to share this. I was with a friend over the weekend, and we were talking about this exact topic, and he brought up this word toxic masculinity, and I was like, all right, explain what that is, right? And then I was like, explain what masculinity is and show me examples of toxic masculinity. And I don't remember, I can't remember exactly what he said, but he said something along the lines of like, you know, not showing emotion. Like if you're masculine, you're not showing emotion. And I was like, is that masculine, or is that just like an inability to express emotion? Like that's a separate thing that has nothing to do with masculinity. That's a human error. That's not a masculine, because there are tons of women who can't express their emotion either. So
Sure.
what does that have to do with it? You know, there's nothing masculine about not expressing emotion. And then, and it's also recognizing that the way men express emotion is different than the way women express emotion. So if we're being told how we're supposed to share our feelings, it's different. Like the way I want to share my feelings is I want to go on a long run. The way I want to share my feelings is I want to work out to the point of pure exhaustion, because then it makes everything else in my life seem more stable, or it helps me understand how relative that situation is to this suck that I'm embracing right now, you know? And I've done the other stuff. I've done the crying and the journaling and going deep on those things. And sometimes those are helpful, but not often. And this was the last thing I wanted to get into. I know we're coming up on our time here. Where is the room for intentional violence? And I call it that because, you know, I found, and that could be triggering right now because there's a lot of violence happening in the world, but this feeling towards men being violent with each other. I understand that because of wars, because of chaotic things that have existed on our planet, that a lot of people stray from that. Or when they see men who embrace violence, that they automatically assume that these are toxic men or men who want to hurt. But I've found within myself and with a lot of men that I speak to that there is a lot of aggression within men. A killer-like aggression, an aggression where there is thought of murder, there is thought of domination, pure domination, and there is no space really, unless you're someone who's in a martial arts world, unless you're in a military. There's not a lot of space for men to express this violence, and I'd love to know in your work if you've thought about this or if you've seen this in some of the work you've done in your time, where there is space for violence and how that is honed by the men around.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I'm going to start answering and let me know if I'm not getting at the root of your question. So like the two examples that you gave, I think are very different. Like when you say war versus like martial arts, like one I would call much more intentional than the other. Like war is something I think should be avoided at all costs, if possible. The mass destruction, the killing, the pillaging, like it's just so much wrong with war. But sometimes we find ourselves in it, right? Martial arts, I find to be something that I respect deeply. And Jesse Elder, who's a philosopher, he's a podcaster, he's one of like the most brilliant minds that I've ever had a chance to meet. You should check out his podcast. It's called Jesse Podcast. Like some of that stuff will blow you away. He's a martial artist. Used to do like fight club stuff in the basement of like these, like bars, like illegal fights. And he's big into, watching UFC and all these other MMA, everything. And what he shared with me is like the men who fight in those arenas, it's like one of the deepest spiritual experiences for them. Right. And one of the things about being, deep in your masculine energy is you're constantly penetrating, right? When you're penetrating, you're going to the edges. Edges are extremes. That's why you see so many more men in extreme sports, putting their lives on the line. That's why you see so many more men in boxing rings and in, MMA, octagons. Women are in those places too, but it's definitely like way more men than women, because there's something about that edge of obliteration that sharpens our focus. Do you know what I'm saying? That like makes you feel alive when there's that much at stake. So I do believe that there's a place for that for a certain set of men. Like I've actually never wanted to move towards that. I've not done jujitsu. I've not done, martial. I've never done boxing. But because for me, that's just like I choose to find my edges in other places. But for a very healthy portion of men, it can be the very thing that takes them like deepest inside them than anything else. Now that can easily be twisted. You look at a Mike Tyson, like, he was one of the best fighters in the world, but he didn't end up in a very good place. Like that was just violence for violence sake. That was ego. There was no inner work on that. It was just like destroy the other guy. Don't have respect for him. Bite his ear off. Like, and you listen to him now, there's a lot of pain. Like that's he's taken advantage of. So I'd say there's definitely a place for that kind of violence, but it's more for, I'm not trying to kill you. It's more like, I respect you. This is the part that I support. I respect you and your ability so much that we can take each other to places inside of ourselves that we can't go on our own. And sometimes that may mean like beating the shit out of each other within like an inch of our lives. And if you sign up for that knowingly, I would support that.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify because I think there's a strong message out there about that mention avoid violence, that it's unhealthy. Inherently, violence is unhealthy. That's the narrative. And I've just found within my own life that has tripped me up because I assumed for a long time that pursuing a spiritual path or a path of growth did not have violence in it. And that's why I call it intentional violence, because it's something you're doing it, and I follow a lot of guys like Tim Kennedy or Jocko Willink. And when you hear them talk about violence, it almost gives them a hard on, like there's something about it that, that giddies them. And, for a while, I just avoided that part of within myself. I grew up in a violent neighborhood. And I grew up wrestling with my brother every day, or fighting with my brother every day, or fighting with my dad almost every day, or getting into fights in the streets. And that was not healthy. That was not healthy violence. It was not intentional. There's nothing there other than just violence. And so I put that away for a while. And I think that's true for a lot of men. I think there's a lot of men who start inherently seeing violence as terrible, or men who never got to experience that part of themselves, or are afraid of that part of themselves that can be violent or that can be dominating in that way, and they don't have spaces to do that. So I did want to hear that coming from you, that it is okay. It is okay to pursue that if you know why you're doing it and what it's for. And if that's something that resonates with you, because like you said, not every man is like that. That's not true for every man, but there are men like myself that is true. And I want to go out there and tear shit up because it teaches them something, so.
Dude, I think this is a really great point, especially the fact that you grew up around it and there's a sense of aliveness, like there's a spark inside of you, like there's definitely an interest. And so now as a mature masculine man, then there's that way, like you harness it. Mm-hmm. And it's like, what's the healthy outlet for it versus like cold cocking someone on the street,
Yeah,
like
exactly.
Right.
But I think that happens. I think that happens because of that, because they're not like, hey, take this energy and put it here. There's no guidance on that.
Yeah.
They just want you to shut it down. The proverbial they, but they just want you to shut it down. And then it lashes out in that way. So yeah, for sure.
Yeah, dude. Yeah. Like I'd be curious to check up on you on that, man. Like I'd love to see which outlet you choose, because like if that fire burns inside of you, then like get to a boxing ring, get to a jiu-jitsu, whatever it is, like find an outlet for that. Cause like I said, like these guys, when I listen to them talk, it sharpens their focus. And that's the thing that like can take you deeper into all areas of your life, sexually, business wise, mental toughness. Yeah. Cool.
I love this chat. And it's funny, just a last thought on this. So I watch like Japanese anime. I know it sounds crazy, but I always tell people like you can learn so much. Like those shows are definitely not for kids. And recently I just watched I'm watching this famous one called My Hero Academia, and there's a scene where the main character fights a childhood friend, and him and his childhood friend have always been kind of like arch enemies. His childhood friend was kind of like a bully, but the main character, just his whole thing is like he has heart. It's your typical hero's journey. Like he was called to have a specific power, and like it's all that. But there's one part where the other kid is telling him like, you keep surpassing me, and I don't like it. And
Yeah.
they just go into this brawl, and they beat each other to the point that they're just like, they're both exhausted. Like the
Yeah.
whole episode is just them fighting it out and just getting it. They're teenagers. They're like 15, 16 as anime. They always use teenage boys as main characters for good reason, I think. And they just beat each other to a pulp. But what comes out of that fight, of them bringing out, and that whole fight, like I was teary eyed, I was getting goosebumps all over my body, because you're just seeing their raw emotion, because they don't
Yeah.
know how to express it. But when they're in that battle and they're just kicking each other's ass, at the end of it, they're able to express their true reasoning for that fight. Like, this is the pain that I'm struggling with. This is why I still need you in my life as a brother, right? And at the end, obviously, one of the teachers comes and stops them from fighting. But after that episode, you notice that this rekindling of their relationship, and how
Sure.
they're like, they have this great friendship, but it's mostly based like, I'm gonna be better than you. I'm gonna hold you accountable to being better, to being the best. And they're both like running for the top, which is the top hero of the anime. And just what you guys were just talking about really made me like think back to that episode, because it's just like, I don't know. I'm thinking about being a father soon, right? Like in the
Mm.
next few years, and I want to have a son, and like I want to put him in that. Like I want you to fight your best friend. Like obviously, like obviously, well, in a controlled setting, and safe. But like being able to experience that, because I think I didn't have that experience. I never had a friend who I got into a fight with. Jesse, you had a brother, and I think that one day you'll probably realize that was for the best, right? I never had that. So I'm always curious, like when it comes to the battle, and like using these to realize like I have power. I think it could bring confidence. I have strength, and I can hold. Like I love that, Dominic, when you were talking about holding that for 20 minutes, which
Yeah.
is insane. First of all,
Intense. Yeah.
it's intense. I think that we do need that for our young men. For and I'm not saying for us older men, maybe jujitsu. I think it's a great outlet, boxing. But for our young men to be able to have those controlled spaces, and that's probably controversial. A lot of people are probably like, "What?" But I think for their mental health, and for all the issues I see, the challenges that our young men are going through right now, and I see it firsthand every single day at my job. I'm like, this is something that I think they need. They're escaping to video games, they're escaping to pornography, and I know you talk about that a lot. And we talked about that on the first podcast. So for folks, if you want to hear that, that was on the first podcast. But um, I think that's just this is we need to remove our young boys from that, and eventually, and I'm hoping that, to Jesse, and we've spoken about this, to create a space for that, for parents to be able to do that with their sons, especially fathers. Hopefully that's a long-term goal. But yeah, I just had that thought to say, and I highly recommend that episode if you're into
If you're a
anime.
Japanese anime, yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I'll say one more thing on that, Ruben, because I think you raise a good point. From a very early age, I like as a kid, I know I was never in fights. I was never raised to defend myself. Like I didn't know martial arts or anything like that. And as a man walking through this world, I'm in pretty good shape, but also like there's always that fear that someone can come along and kick my ass. Like
Right.
as a man in this world, like we're still expected to be the ones who defend. Like, right,
Right.
if something goes down, like it's women and children on the boats first, and we're the ones who are like, like physically, when something goes down physically, we are the first line of defense. And not being able to defend myself, really, like other than maybe throwing a few haymakers, if like there's someone else who has any level of training or who's bigger than me, like that, then I walk around with that constant sense of threat in this world. Like
Mm.
it's however subtle that is, it is present in my existence. And I see you guys nodding your heads, like, that's true too. So many other men walk around with that. And so I like, if I were to go back in time, or when I raise my boys in the future, like I will definitely lean towards, and this is obviously going to be a discussion with like my future partner, but I would want to put them in a program where they could learn how to defend themselves, hopefully so they never have to use it, but so that there's like an erectness to their spine and like not like don't have that kind of fear walking through society like I've had.
Totally agree.
And it's also never too late to, jiu-jitsu is
True.
a great option to go and do it. I've taken jiu-jitsu before. There's always like a kid's class and a parent's class. So, you can always do it
Planting
too.
that seed, dude. Yeah.
When we're able to. Funny enough, fun fact, I have a steel mace that I work out with. I always keep it in my bedroom just in case. Like,
What is it?
I'm a steel mace, it's
What's
like
that?
a workout tool on it, steel mace.
Oh, okay.
It's like a workout tool, but because it has a long, I have it right here. I can show
It's
you.
like a baton that you can like beat somebody with. Oh, you're always with that? I mean, that thing looks cumbersome.
Not with it all the time, but since the protest, this has been more prevalent. But since all this has been happening, and my city that I live in, San Jose, California,
Yeah, nice.
has been one of those places where the protests happened, and I was like, the cops and like the whole defunding thing, all this stuff. I'm like, will someone try to like break in, like if at any moment? So like it's always in my bedroom, like right there, ready to go. So in case any of that happens, I'm like, I'm ready to go. Right. And it kind of sucks because once again, like similar to you, I didn't do a martial art. I never really got into fights as a kid. Like if that happens, like, will I be okay? Will I be able to defend the home? Will I be able to defend my partner? Like, will I be able to defend myself? Like, that's always a constant thing. So I think it's very, Jesse brings up a good point with like intentional violence and being able to stand your ground and be able to face an adversity when they arise. And it's just funny that we talked about that. I'm just like, I've always had the steel mace as a just in case in my bedroom.
I should get one.
Just in case. But anyway, so I know we're at time. I do have one thing to ask. I saw on your story that you have a book coming out. So
yeah.
What is
Yes.
it?
I got one. I got one right here. It's called On Purpose Leadership. And the subtitle is Master the Art of Leading Yourself so you can inspire and impact others. So this is basically like a personal leadership book. I found that so many leaders, like I get hired to do a lot of work with, corporates and business owners, and they're constantly asking me, like, how do I get other people to change? How do I get my people to act with more urgency? How do I get them to change? How do I hold them accountable? And none of the leaders were looking at themselves first. So I saw that many of the leaders were embodying the very bad behaviors they wanted to change in their people, lack of urgency, vision, clarity. And so I wrote a book that really helps you to find purpose, establish principles that guide your behavior, design daily practices like morning and evening routines that make it a plan, that make it practical. And that book is coming out on September 22nd. So On Purpose Leadership. Yeah.
But folks will be able to find it on Amazon, your website.
Everywhere. Yeah. So I would say Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Target, and maybe in some bookstores. And the Strand, my favorite bookstore here in New York City, has it online. And my website is DominickQ.com. So come check that out. But I would say like the thing that I would love for the most, especially for actually any of your listeners, men or women, we have a healthy contingent. The Great Man Within podcast is like our crown jewel. You've heard, Ruben and Jesse reference it a few times. We have great guests, especially for women who listen to your show. If they're looking for like, how do I get my guy to do inner work? Like women are often the ones who point them to our podcast first. It's almost always a woman who brings them to the show. So until we step up, fellas, and do better, the women seem to be the leading the charge and getting guys on that inner work path. But I want to change. I want to change that.
You got
Amazing.
it. Well, thank you so much for being on, Dom. Obviously, everything will be in the show notes, your socials, your website, so folks can look there to get in touch with you. Always appreciate having you, man. It's been a joy.
Thanks, man.
Ruben.
Thank you, Dom.
Thank you, Jesse. Great seeing you guys.
Thank you.